Greetings. Now, I've played a few Oculus Quest games in my time, so I thought it'd be a good opportunity to put together my own top 10 list of Oculus Quest games sorted by genre. Although this is not just a top 10, because I also talk about some runner-up games that almost got the top spot but just missed out. As always, if you like the video, it really helps me out if you press that like button, and I really appreciate if you did consider subscribing. Now, just one more thing to mention before I go on. These games I've selected are only from the official Oculus Quest store. They are not App Lab games or side quest games. I've deliberately excluded those just because I want to focus specifically on the Oculus Quest store, although I have top 5 and top 10 App Lab game lists in the playlist, which I'll link in the description below if you want to check those out. Now, of course, my top 10 list might be a bit different to yours, but despite that, what I can say is that each game that I've chosen for the top spot for each genre is a great game. I also have timestamps in the description below if you want to skip to a certain part. And with that, let's go check out those games. We're going to kick it off by looking at the top horror game for the Oculus Quest. Now, there's a pretty decent selection of good horror and survival horror games out for the Quest. For example, Lies Beneath is a fantastic survival horror game that's done in a cartoony style, which has some really great gameplay mechanics, some really solid visual audio design, and a pretty lengthy campaign too. There's also Dread Halls, which is just such a scary game. It really plays on your psychology to make you scared. You always feel like something is sneaking up on you or lurking around the corner, and it's dead cheap too at about $10 US. Then there's Five Nights at Freddy's, which is a collection of mini games where you have to survive terrifying encounters with killer animatronics. But don't let the cutesy features of these animatronic creatures fool you. This is one of the most scary games you can play on your Oculus Quest right now. However, for me, top spot for best horror / survival horror game has to go to Walking Dead Saints and Sinners. This game not only has some of the best graphics you're likely to see on the Quest, but it also has some of the best gameplay too. In true survival horror fashion, you'll be scavenging for food, tools and weapons, or making your own weapons from scrap parts in order to survive. And there is a ton of different weapons to choose from that lets you pop zombie heads in a number of different gory and satisfying ways. It also features a pretty solid storyline that branches depending on the choices you make. And while you might be able to power through the main quests in about 7 hours or so, if you're taking your time and doing the side quests, it will probably take you around 12 hours or more. But if you want more, Walking Dead also includes a Horde mode, and we'll be receiving free DLC called Aftershock September 23rd that will add new missions, new threats and new story elements, with Aftershocks just being the first of new content planned to come for this game. When it comes to the best rhythm game on the Quest, Beat Saber and Synth Riders could have easily made the top spot on this list. But I have to choose one, and I've got to say I enjoy Pistol Whip more, so Pistol Whip it is. But if you're in the market for a rhythm fitness game, then both Beat Saber and Synth Riders are well worth looking into. So the gameplay is pretty straightforward. You're carried through the level from point A to point B and have to shoot enemies to the beat while dodging their incoming attacks. The soundtracks sound great, and the action is like John Wick meets The Matrix. Now, although you wouldn't look that cool from someone watching you from the outside, when you are playing this game, you do feel like an action hero. It makes you feel really good, like some unstoppable killing machine. And because you're having so much fun, you don't realise how much exercise you're actually doing. Now, another reason I love this game is because the devs just keep on giving us free update after free update, the latest being Smoke and Thunder. This is a new cinematic campaign set in the Wild West. There is also this really extensive modifier system called Styles, where you get to pick and choose different modifiers to make a unique gameplay experience each time. You can change the game mechanics in so many different ways. There's so many different combinations to choose from. Some examples of these modifiers include the big head mode or the bullet hell mode, which is just an insane level of difficulty that will really keep you on your toes. Pistol Whip launched with 10 scenes, each with different environments, story and soundtrack, but since launch the developers have added to that massively. Now there are 28 unique scenes, meaning Pistol Whip offers fantastic value for your money. When it comes to strategy games for the Quest, there's probably not as big a selection as I would have liked, but there are some pretty good ones here like Chess Club and Eternal Starlight, which is a pretty good tactical space combat game But for me and for all those tabletop strategy game lovers out there, it has to be Demeo. This game recreates the experience of sitting around playing a board game perfectly, except you don't have none of the hassle of setting up the pieces or trying to organise a time for everyone to be at the same location in order to play it. Now currently, as I speak, you have 4 heroes to choose from, although there are more coming in the future, and each of these classes have their own unique abilities, strengths and weaknesses, and the weaknesses are pretty much what you would expect. For example, a wizard can do some great ranged and area of effect damage, but isn't fantastic in close combat, whereas the warrior is fantastic in close combat, but as you guessed, is not the best pick when it comes to dealing range damage. Now each hero has 2 action points spent either by moving, attacking or interacting with something like a treasure chest. Players can also use special cards, and these cards have a range of abilities from protective abilities such as healing or providing extra armor to devastating attacks and spells. Demeo is fun as a single player experience, but like any other board game, where this game really shines is with its 2 to 4 player multiplayer mode. Now it's not like D&D in the sense that it doesn't go into too much detail when it comes to different stats and abilities, so don't be expecting too many complex mechanics here, but there's still plenty of strategy to have even though there's not much complexity. Plus that's one of the beauties of this game, is that it makes it so much easier to pick up and play and get straight into it. So although I really love this game, one of the gripes that I did have when this was first released was perhaps it was a bit too short. You only had the one campaign, the Black Sarcophagus, which consisted of 3 dungeons, and sure, the dungeons were procedurally generated, so the layout was different each time you played, but it did still feel a bit too light on content. However, since then they've released the Realm of the Rat King, another campaign, which essentially doubles the game in size, so that you're getting plenty of content for your money. So the roguelike category was the one I had the most difficulty choosing a single game for. There's Yuki, the retro shooter, which is a bit like Space Harrier in VR. It's one of those hidden gems, it's super addictive and fun to play. Then there's Cosmo Dread, and I absolutely love this game. It's such a scary roguelike game, and it's super cheap, it's great value for money. And by the way, I have reviews for both Yuki and Cosmo Dread, so if you want to learn more about these games, check the description below, I'll put the links there. And then of course there's In Death Unchained, which is a bow and arrow roguelike, which is super fun, but also really challenging. These are all great games and I can recommend each and every one of them, and I think many would place In Death Unchained as number 1 on this spot, but for me, the number 1 roguelike has to be Until You Fall. I found Until You Fall to have a good difficulty balance, so you will die often, but you do get currency each time you die to spend towards better weapon upgrades, and so each time you play you generally tend to get a bit further than the last time you played. Also of course there's a lot of skill involved, and as you practice you increase your skills and get a bit better each time, helping you go a bit further. The combat system is absolutely fantastic, and it never got old for me despite repeated playthroughs. It not only relies on speed and quick reaction times, but also accuracy. For example, when you're blocking, you have to match your blade in the direction shown on screen to block successfully, and when you reduce an enemy's armor to 0, markers appear on screen and you have to slash in the direction shown in order to do damage to their health. Now there's a nice variety of enemies and each has different attacks, so you have to approach them differently depending on what enemy you're fighting. You also have plenty of different weapons and weapon upgrades. You can also dual wield as well. And there are certain pros and cons to using different weapon loadouts and different upgrades. For example, at the end of each stage you get to choose a single upgrade from a selection. And there's a ton of strategy that goes into your choice. For example, do I choose this crystal that increases my combo limit, or do I choose this other crystal that gives me increased guard and health damage for my weapons? The polished audio visuals, the variety of enemies and weapons and upgrades, and the strategy that goes behind choosing each one carefully makes for a super addictive experience. Now a full playthrough will take you about half an hour. There are different difficulty settings as well, which might take you a bit longer or shorter depending on the difficulty you have it, but it will take you, I think, quite a few tries before you manage a full playthrough. I think it took me about 8 hours before I managed one full successful run, so there's plenty to get stuck into, and as an added bonus, this game gives you a great workout at the same time. Now, the best sports game for the Oculus Quest was also a really tough category, and that's because there are a lot of good sports games on the Quest, but it's also going to depend on what sports you enjoy. For example, I'm not a keen fisher, but real VR fishing is actually a fantastic game if you're into that. But some of those which I enjoy the most are Thrill of the Fight, which is a pretty realistic boxing simulator. It's a great workout and fantastic value too. There's also 11 Table Tennis. Now again, this is another great sports game. It actually feels really realistic because if you play table tennis in real life, you'll know that the ping pong ball, when you hit it, there's not much tactile feedback. So when you are playing in the headset and you're not getting that tactile feedback, it doesn't feel all too dissimilar from the real thing. So that, combined with the great physics and the awesome online multiplayer modes, makes this a really fun game even if you're not into table tennis. I still think it's worth checking this one out because I think you're going to enjoy it even if you're not a massive fan of table tennis. But number one for me has to be Walkabout Mini Golf. Now check out the price on this game, because when I start talking about how much content you actually get with it, you'll realise how much of a good price this actually is. At the time of this video, Walkabout Mini Golf comes with no less than 7 18-hole courses to master. The handling of the clubs and the physics feel great, each course is unique, and there's plenty of cool and wacky obstacles to get around like you might expect from any good mini golf game. Within each hole there are about 18 hidden balls to collect. Each of these balls have unique designs on them, and if you collect 10 of those hidden balls, you unlock the harder version of the course you're playing. Once you unlock that harder course, you will then have the choice to do a scavenger hunt. Now in the scavenger hunt you collect items relating to a theme of that particular map, and if you complete a scavenger hunt successfully, you then receive a uniquely designed putter. So hopefully with that I've just given you an idea of how much content is actually included in this game, and this game is continuing to receive updates, so likely that we'll receive new maps in the future as well as other content. Now it's also worth mentioning that in addition to the solo mode, you also have multiplayer modes with up to 5 players allowed in a private room. There's also cross-buy, cross-play and a 90Hz mode on the Quest 2. Picking the best puzzle game on the Quest was another toughie. We have a bunch of fantastic puzzle games on the Quest already, like the spine-tingling world of The Room VR, A Dark Matter, which is simply a visually stunning masterpiece with fantastic puzzles. Or you have the weird and wonderful A Fisherman's Tale, which offers up some mind-bending puzzles and a funny, charming story, even if it is a bit on the shorter side. There's also Myst VR, which is a great classic puzzle adventure. Some of the puzzles are probably a bit too cryptic, but if you are into challenging puzzle solving, then you might find Myst VR to be one for you. There's also Red Matter VR, which is a puzzle game set in a sci-fi universe. Has some good puzzles, a nice story, and some great visuals for the Quest. It's a super immersive and atmospheric game, even if it is a bit on the shorter side in terms of its length. And then there's Shadow Point. Now this is a personal little favourite of mine. It has a nice story and some really unique puzzle solving that involves setting up objects and lights in specific ways so they cast different types of shadows that solve puzzles. And the story narration is done by none other than Patrick Stewart. But for me, the best puzzle game on the Quest has to be I Expect You to Die Too. What can I say about this game except that it hits the mark on pretty much every criteria. But before I get into that, let's talk about what this game is actually about. You play as a secret agent. You have to defeat the evil Zaraxis organization, and in order to foil their plans for world domination, you have to solve puzzles. And these puzzles often come with a side order of death. So expect to die often and expect a lot of trial and error. So I Expect You to Die Too has some really nice visuals, it has a great soundtrack, as well as an engaging and funny storyline that gets its humour from bi-movie cliches from popular series like James Bond. But what about the puzzles, I hear you ask, because that's what it really comes down to. I Expect You to Die Too has some really clever puzzle solving that makes good use of the player's physical presence in the virtual world. So the puzzles are all about your situational awareness and interacting with the environment, which makes them just perfect for the medium of virtual reality. And sure, they can be quite challenging, but I do like a challenging puzzle game, and it makes it all the more rewarding when you do finally solve them. When it comes to flying games on the Quest, there's actually not a whole lot to choose from. There is this game which is pretty good. It's called Rush, and it's a wingsuit flying game that involves racing to the finish line. There's also a time attack mode and a score challenge mode. There's single player on offer as well as a 4-player multiplayer mode too. There's also Ultra Wings, which is a pretty decent flying game too. Now you get to pilot 4 distinct aircraft, And gameplay essentially involves a bunch of mini games such as popping balloons or participating in air races, trying to get a maximum score by flying through rings or performing emergency landings. When it comes to flight simulators, for me it's hands down Warplanes World War I Fighters. Now this game was first available on the App Lab store before being brought over to the official Quest store. Now not many games make this transition to the official store, but when you play Warplanes you can see why this game was a rare exception. Warplanes gives you two action-packed campaigns where you can play as either the Central Powers, which is Germans and their allies, or the Triple Entente, which is the British and their allies. And with each campaign you have options to customize or upgrade your planes with things like extra speed or extra ammo, damage and so on. You can even buy additional planes from the 18 different planes on offer and build your very own squadron to go into battle. But upgrades and planes do cost money, which you earn by completing missions. Now missions range from destroying fighters, bombers and blimps to taking out land and sea targets. The visuals are great and the flying is simple but handles fantastically well. You can choose from different flight modes too. You can choose a more arcade style flight mode or a more realistic simulator style. Now the more realistic simulator modes for me were by far the most fun, as it allowed you to do things like taking off and landing the craft or advanced mid-air maneuvers like rolls. But just be aware, if you do tend to experience VR motion sickness, this game can get quite intense. There is also cross-platform PvP and co-op modes, which adds another layer of awesomeness to what is already a fantastic combat flight experience. My only niggle here is that the main campaign is not playable through co-op. Other than that, this is a fantastic game at an equally fantastic price. So now let's talk about racing sims. Quite a few of the racers out there on the Quest at the moment are a mix of racing with combat, like this game Dash Dash World, which is kind of like Mario Kart in virtual reality. And then you have Def Lab, which is another combat racer which looks a bit like the game series Twisted Metal but in VR. And then we have Radial G Proteus, another racing combat game, this time quite a futuristic one, and you've probably guessed it by now, has similarities to the Wipeout series of games. But my top pick for best racing game on the Oculus Quest reminds me of the Micro Machines games. It's called Mini Motor Racing X. In this game you take control of remote control cars. Now if you're looking for a realistic racing sim, then this is not going to be it. The graphics are vibrant and cartoony, and the gameplay has a very much arcade feel to it. But if you don't mind that, you're going to find this such a fun little racer. You can collect dozens of cars and there are over 50 tracks in which to race. And if you love racing games but find you can't play them because you get motion sickness, then this game allows you to play top down, which is a lot more comfortable, but it's every bit as fun as playing first person. There's also full online multiplayer with up to 4 friends and a campaign co-op mode. And there are plenty of party games that you can play with friends, like this Battle Arena game where you shoot each other with all kinds of different weapons, and this Bumper Ball game which is basically like playing football with a giant ball. All these games are so much fun to play, and there's a lot of content here which makes this game my number one pick for a racing game on the Oculus Quest. Now when you're talking action adventure games, then it has to be hands down Tarzan for the Oculus Quest. Just kidding. No, it has to be hands down Moss. But before I talk about Moss, let me mention a couple of other good ones that I really enjoy. There's Pixel Ripped 1995, which takes you back to the 90s. You get to re-experience life as a kid, sitting on the floor with a controller, playing 16-bit games. It's a really unique concept with great nostalgia value. The gameplay is also solid and it's definitely one well worth checking out. There's also Trover Save the Universe. Now this is more of a comedy action adventure, if you like. This game is from the co-creators of Rick and Morty, so as you might expect, it is very funny. There are some puzzles here or there is some combat too and some platforming involved, but nothing too challenging. This game is fairly relaxing, you can play it seated, and where it shines is really in the story and the humour and the laugh out loud moments. So if the Rick and Morty style humour is not really your cup of tea, then it might be best to avoid this one. But now let's get back to my top pick for this category, which is Moss. Now this is a single player action adventure puzzle game that's been included in quite a few top 10 lists, and with good reason. So the main protagonist in this game is Quill, who is a young mouse who has dreams of greatness beyond the confines of her settlement in which she lives. You find a mysterious glass relic in the woods and awaken an ancient magic which sets you on an epic adventure. There's something really magical in the environments and the story that will just have you hooked. Now the puzzles aren't too challenging, although they are quite clever and well thought out, and there are some in there that might have you stumped for a little while at least. But for me, the main selling point of this game is not so much the puzzles, but the combat, which is really fun, and the story, which just fills you with wonder and really fuels your imagination. It really takes you on a fantastic little adventure that leaves you wanting more. Now you can probably get through this game in about 4 hours if you just plow through every puzzle, but if you do take your time, find the hidden things like hidden papers and other things to collect, then you'll probably get about 5 or 6 hours out of this game. And it's 5 or 6 hours well spent. And now we get into shooters, and man, this one is tough. There are quite a few shooters on the Quest and quite a few good ones too. So I might just split it into 2 categories because you have your shooters which are more of a single player experience, then you have your shooters which focus more on multiplayer. So in terms of single player shooters, first we'll talk about some honourable mentions. If you're after an arcade shooter, Swarm is a good choice. There's lots of swinging involved in that one though, so if you do get motion sickness, just be aware of that, as it can get quite intense. Then there's Sniper Elite VR. This is a World War II shooter that focuses on the single player story campaign and has some pretty awesome sniping mechanics. But for a more modern day story driven shooter, you might look at Zero Caliber Reloaded. Now there are a lot of reviews out there for this game, showing Zero Caliber Reloaded to be an above average shooter at best. And you know what, when the game was first released, I would have agreed with those scores. In fact, that's when the reviews were done, when the game was first released. But since then, it's had this update, and this update, and this update, as well as this update, and this update. So it's improved quite a lot. So if you're after a modern day campaign focused shooter, or a shooter where you can play the campaign co-op with someone else, I would certainly keep this in mind. And I could go on and on, there are a lot of great shooters out there, but I have to choose one, and the one for me has to be Superhot VR. Now Superhot VR did receive some controversy recently, where it retroactively removed a part of the game where you effectively had to end your life. But wherever you stand on that controversy, this is still undeniably one of the best shooters on the Oculus Quest. What makes it so good are these unique bullet time mechanics. So as you move, so does time. So you really have to think about how you're moving in relation to the enemies and the enemies' projectiles that are coming at you. It's just a very different type of shooter to anything I've played before, and it works really well. It can be tough, it can be frustrating, but it's also massively addictive. Now the single player campaign story is fairly short, but once you're done with that, there are plenty of other modes to play, as well as an endless mode and achievements to get. So there's a lot of content here to get stuck into beyond the single player campaign experience. And now moving on to the multiplayer shooters, again there's plenty here that are actually great shooters, and so it's very hard to choose just one. But I'll just go through a quick list. We have Onward, which is a very realistic tactical shooter. If you're looking for realism, then Onward might be the game you're after. Then we have Contractors, which is again a military competitive multiplayer shooter, although it's less realistic than Onward. So if you're looking for more of an arcade experience than the very realistic Onward, then Contractors might be for you. But if you're looking for something that's quite arcadey, completely unrealistic, in fact futuristic, then I would recommend Hyperdash, which is a fast, fun little shooter. And finally, Blast On is also a fantastic selection if you're wanting a 1 vs 1 dueling multiplayer shooting game. Then Blast On is great. It's also super cheap too, at only $10. But for me, I would say the top pick, if I had to choose one, would be Population 1. This is a battle royale type of game. You can have up to 18 players on a map, and you and your team of 2 other players are dropped down into the map, and you have to battle it out until there's only one person or one team left standing. The gameplay feels fast, snappy and smooth. Games are generally quite fast paced and are over fairly quickly, so if you do die soon, you can easily just jump into the next one. You've got some really cool game mechanics, such as being able to glide or climb or even build your own walls so that you can provide your own cover. It's just a really fun and addictive game. Now, just one warning, if you do suffer from motion sickness, while there are comfort options, it can be a bit of an intense game, so just approach this one with caution. And there is no solo mode, it is a purely multiplayer game. But if you're okay with that and you like battle royale types of games, then you'll definitely want to check this one out. That was a big list. It took me a long time to put that together and a lot of thought. I hope you liked it. But what did you think? Are there any games you would have swapped out in the top spot? Any games you would have added? Let me know in the comment section below. As always, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.